In Florida, a grim new precedent was being set. The governor had just authorized the 9th execution of the year, a number unseen since 1976. The name on the latest death warrant belonged to a former airman from Eglin Air Force Base, Edward Zakrzewski. His conviction was for the murders of his wife and their 2 children. Back in 1996, Zakrzewski had entered a guilty plea to 3 charges of first-degree murder, resulting in 3 separate death sentences. He was a man who had once raised his hand and sworn an oath to protect and defend the United States. Edward James Zakrzewski II had achieved the rank of technical sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, a promotion that is not easily earned. It required years of discipline and proven leadership. On June 9, 1994, he was 29 years old. By the end of that day, his wife and children were dead. 31 years later, on July 31, 2025, the state of Florida would strap him to a gurney. It marked the state's 9th execution that year alone, setting a modern record. But to understand that final day, one must go back to the beginning. Welcome to the last sentence. This is a case that was nearly erased from the American consciousness, not for a lack of evidence or significance, but because of a larger story that was dominating the headlines that week. An event so overwhelming, it diverted a nation's gaze from a mother and 2 small children who deserved to be front-page news. We will explore that event, and in doing so, you will see precisely how a crime this brutal could be so completely buried. There is another crucial element to this story. For 31 years, the condemned man did not quietly await his fate. He fought his sentence through every level of the judicial system, from state courts to federal, and finally to the U.S. Supreme Court. Every court denied his appeals. At the nation's highest court, there was not one single dissenting opinion. If you are interested in cases like this, stories that have nearly vanished from the public record, subscribe to this channel now. This is the focus of our work. Every week, we investigate the cases and the victims who were denied the attention they were due. Now, we examine what truly happened. Edward James Zakrzewski II was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, on January 31, 1965. After a brief time in college, he joined the Air Force. He was known to be disciplined, focused, and highly capable, eventually rising to the rank of technical sergeant. This supervisory role is awarded only after years of consistent high performance and demonstrated leadership. By 1994, he was pursuing higher education again, attending night college while serving, only 1 year from finishing his degree. On paper, he was a man with a promising career and a clear future. The woman he married was from South Korea. Her name at birth was Panim. Before Edward, she was married to another American serviceman, a relationship her family had openly condemned. That first marriage produced no children and eventually ended. According to court testimony, she was working at a base exchange store in Montana when she first encountered Edward Zakrzewski. They married after she learned she was pregnant. She adopted the American name Sylvia and was 34 years old when she died. They would have 2 children. Their son, Edward III, was 7 and went by his Korean middle name, Kim. Their daughter, Anna, was 5 years old. Between 1989 and 1992, the family lived in South Korea. For Sylvia, it was the closest she had felt to being home, a sense of peace she had long missed. But court records later showed she faced prejudice there for her marriage to an American and for her mixed-race children. The homecoming she had hoped for was far more complicated than she'd imagined. In 1992, new orders came through. The family moved to Mary Esther, Florida, in Okaloosa County, close to Eglin Air Force Base. In April of 1994, they bought their first home on Shrewsbury Road, about 40 miles from Pensacola. From the street, they appeared to be a family building a life. Inside the house, the marriage was disintegrating. Sylvia had plans to return to South Korea permanently and told friends she intended to take her children with her. But before June 9, 1994, there had been a chilling warning. A neighbor had overheard Edward Zakrzewski say on at least 2 occasions that he would murder his entire family before he would ever accept a divorce. He was direct, he was clear. And the neighbor who heard the threat decided to say nothing, not to Sylvia, not to military officials, and not to the police. That vital information would not come to light until investigators were already inside the home on Shrewsbury Road. For retired prosecutor Bobby Elmore, who tried the case, the scene inside that house was the most horrific he would witness in his entire career. Detective Joe Nelson, with the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, the lead investigator for the case, expressed the same view. They were 2 seasoned professionals, But this case was unlike any other they had ever encountered. An investigation into the timeline, however, would reframe the entire event. On the evening of June 8, 1994, Zakrzewski drank heavily and took over $5,400 from their joint account. This withdrawal predated his son's call and any mention of divorce on June 9th. The money had been taken the previous night. The case's presiding judge, G. Robert Barron, addressed this very point. He saw Zakrzewski's actions as the result of calm reflection and deliberate planning, not a reaction, but a decision already cemented before the workday of June 9th. Edward Zakrzewski arrived for duty at Eglin Air Force Base that morning, his conduct completely unremarkable to onlookers. Then, the call came from his 7-year-old son, Edward. The message was that his mother wanted a divorce and was returning to South Korea. It was never determined if his wife, Sylvia, had instructed the boy to call. The record only shows Zakrzewski's actions in the hours after, when he purchased a machete from a surplus store. He made a stop at the house on Shrewsbury Road before going back to the base. In the house, he sharpened the new blade, staged a crowbar, and cut a section of rope. He prepared and placed 3 items before his family came home, then completed his shift. No one he worked with that afternoon noticed anything unusual about him. After leaving the base, he stopped for a drink with another military veteran. During their talk, Zakrzewski posed a chilling question about the feeling of taking a life. His friend dismissed the remark, a detail he would later relay to authorities. Arriving home, Zakrzewski sent his children to watch television and called for his wife. When she didn't appear, he found her in the living room and struck her. There was no argument, no prior exchange. The official record calls the assault immediate and unprovoked. He pulled her into the bedroom, where the attack persisted before he strangled her with the rope. Dr. Edward Harvard, the medical examiner, would later testify in court about his findings. He confirmed that despite a fractured skull and multiple other injuries, Sylvia was conscious when he took her life. She was 34 years old. Zakrzewski then directed his 7-year-old son, Edward, and then his 5-year-old daughter, Anna, into the bathroom. Dr. Harvard's post-mortem examination showed injuries on both children consistent with defensive wounds. These were the kind of marks left when a person tries to shield themselves from attack. At just 7 and 5 years of age, they had both tried to fight back. A bloodstain analyst, Jan Johnson, testified about her reconstruction of the scene. She concluded Anna was in a kneeling position over the tub's edge. Her brother was already there. The forensic evidence was clear. Anna had seen what was done to Edward before she died. He gathered all 3 bodies in the bathroom, washed himself, put on clean clothes, and left. He went to a bar and drank for hours until he was severely impaired. Later, officers on patrol discovered him unconscious inside his car. They confiscated his keys and departed, seeing only an intoxicated man with no connection to anything else. They could not have known what lay waiting inside the Shrewsbury Road house. On the morning of June 10, 1994, Zakrzewski awoke without his car keys. He walked to Shrewsbury Road and forced his way inside through a window. There, he changed his clothes, located a spare key, and reported for duty, his manner betraying nothing. He departed before his shift was over, drove to the bank, and emptied the account. He then made his way to Orlando International, boarding a flight for Hawaii. Once that plane was in the air, his location was a mystery. The house remained undisturbed for 3 days. On June 13th, investigators from the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office entered and began processing the property, led by Detective Joe Nelson. 3 critical forensic discoveries were made almost immediately. Bloodstains were found on the living room couch, concealed beneath a shirt belonging to Zakrzewski. A second sample of blood was identified on a pair of his socks, recovered from a laundry hamper. He had changed his clothes before he fled, and what he discarded tied him inextricably to the events that had unfolded inside that house. A third detail stood out. His blue 1992 geoprism was gone, not reported stolen or towed, but vanished along with him. Considering the totality of the other evidence recovered from the scene, a missing vehicle registered to the man they were focused on was seen as proof of a deliberate escape. Detective Nelson would later remark that he had never encountered a scene of that kind in his entire career, an assessment that needed no further explanation. Investigators painstakingly constructed their physical case before advancing to the next phase. The official warrant for Edward James Zakrzewski II's arrest was signed on June 16, 1994, 3 days post-discovery. When authorities acted, the official record supported them entirely. On June 13, 1994, personnel from Eglin Air Force Base had arrived at the Shrewsbury Road residence. Zakrzewski had missed his duty assignment and was officially marked absent without authorization. They alerted the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, whose deputies met them at the address. They discovered a shattered window and made entry into the home. Bobby Elmore, a retired assistant state attorney, would later call what they found inside the most disturbing crime scene of his entire career. Coming from a prosecutor of his standing, that declaration held immense gravity. Edward Zakrzewski was immediately named the primary suspect. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was called in. The United States Marshals Service also joined the manhunt. His family's residence in Kalamazoo, Michigan, was put under direct surveillance. Every known associate was located and interrogated, but no leads surfaced. There were no verified sightings, no credible intelligence on his whereabouts. The trail had gone cold, and a peculiar context explains why this horrific case garnered almost no national attention. On Sunday, June 12, 1994, the evening before the discovery on Shrewsbury Road, the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were found in Brentwood, California. By that Monday morning, O.J. Simpson was the prime suspect. On the very day deputies were inside Zakrzewski's home, a white Ford Bronco traveled down a California freeway with O.J. Simpson as a passenger. That chase captivated an audience of roughly 95 million viewers nationwide. 95 million pairs of eyes were on that highway. Sylvia Zakrzewski, Edward Zakrzewski, 37 years old, Anna Zakrzewski, 5 years old. 3 victims, whose story deserved the nation's focus, received virtually none. The case was eclipsed before it could even be told. Zakrzewski was formally indicted in Okaloosa County on November 19, 1994, on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The legal machinery was ready. The prosecution was prepared. All that was missing was the accused. When Edward Zakrzewski arrived in Hawaii, he did so with a distinct tactical advantage. He had no connections there, no relatives, no prior associates, nothing that law enforcement could trace. This was not by chance. It was precisely why he selected Hawaii. He landed first on Maui, maintaining a low profile as long as his cash lasted. Once his money was gone, he relocated to Molokai, a smaller, more remote island. He was living under an assumed name. He called himself Michael Ray Green. Some records from that time also show the alias as Robert Michael Green. On Molokai, he encountered a pastor and his wife who ran a religious commune on the island. He gave them his false name, claiming to be a man seeking work and a new beginning. The agreement was simple. He would perform maintenance work in return for lodging in a small outbuilding on their land. Within about 2 weeks, he was being invited into the main house for meals and to watch television with the family. For 4 months, this arrangement continued. The FBI and U.S. Marshals were chasing down every possible lead back on the mainland. Zakrzewski was in a pastor's living room on a remote Hawaiian island, using a name that was untraceable in any system. Then came the night of October 14, 1994. Unsolved Mysteries was on. The Zakrzewski piece was not a main feature, but part of a brief fugitive segment, shown alongside 2 other wanted men, Alan Verlaine, Sneed, and Nazario Palacios. Even in the broadcast that ultimately led to his capture, his case was not the headline. The pastor and his wife were watching, and Zakrzewski was in the room with them. When his face appeared on screen, the pastor confronted him. Zakrzewski acknowledged the resemblance, then casually dismissed it. The couple's suspicion lingered. They planned to press him for the truth the next morning. On October 15th, they went to his room only to find it empty. He had fled in the dead of night. All he left was a note that read, "I'm sorry." That morning, Zakrzewski walked onto Molokai Island and surrendered to police. He gave them his real name. The manhunt was over. By October 25th, 1994, he was back in Florida, but less than a year later, he would try to run again. In August 1995, he and another inmate were caught at the perimeter fence of the Okaloosa County Jail. Even facing 3 counts of first-degree murder, his instinct was to escape accountability. On March 19, 1996, the evidence left him no choice but to plead guilty to all 3 murders. In the penalty phase that followed, a jury would decide between life and death. The defense attorneys, Isaac Curran and Elton Klum, argued for mitigation, citing his military service and acclaimed religious conversion. Zakrzewski himself took the stand to profess his remorse. Attorney Klum portrayed the murder of his children as an act of mercy, a way to shield them from discrimination in South Korea. In open court, Klum used the term half-breeds, and made unsubstantiated claims of Sylvia's infidelity and gambling debts. None of the accusations were ever proven. They were merely claims offered in a desperate attempt to spare his life. Prosecutor Bobby Elmore countered with the cold, hard facts. The machete purchased at lunch, the blade sharpened, the rope pre-cut. He laid out the crowbar staged in the bedroom and the bank withdrawal made the night before the murders. He then presented Zakrzewski's own writings on Friedrich Nietzsche, dismantling the story of religious remorse with the killer's own words. For the murders of Sylvia and Edward III, the jury voted 7-5 for death. For Anna, they were deadlocked, 6-6. Judge G. Robert Barron overrode the jury. Citing 3 aggravating factors, he sentenced Zakrzewski to death on all 3 counts. Those factors were prior capital offenses, cold and calculated planning, and an especially heinous level of cruelty. The date of the sentence was April 19, 1996. This sentence, built on a 7-5 vote and a 6-6 deadlock, created a legal question that would last for 3 decades. Under the law in Florida today, such a path to execution is impossible. Current law requires an 8-4 jury majority for a death sentence, a threshold this case never reached. Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty noted that in no other state in the country, nor under present Florida law, could those jury numbers have led to an execution. His attorneys argued this point at every turn. Every court rejected it. The Florida Supreme Court denied his first appeal on June 12, 1998. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the case in January 1999. Further appeals failed in 2003. The 11th Circuit dismissed his case in 2006 and again in 2009. A final appeal was denied in 2018. That same year, the murders were officially named one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Northwest Florida. On July 1, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant. One day before the execution, on July 30th, his legal team filed a final petition to the United States Supreme Court. It was denied unanimously. 31 years of appeals, and every single one failed. And that answers the second question posed at the start of this film. Outside the prison, a petition circulated to halt the execution. Maria de Liberato led a prayer vigil outside Florida State Prison on the day he was scheduled to die. There is one final, unsettling detail. In 1998, another Gulf War veteran, Jeffrey Hutchinson, was convicted of murdering his girlfriend and her 3 children, also in Okaloosa County. He was also sentenced to death and was executed on May 1, 2025, 3 months before Zakrzewski. July 31, 2025. Florida State Prison near Stark. The official account came from Paul Walker, the Deputy Communications Director for the Florida Department of Corrections. He confirmed the day's final details. Zakrzewski awoke at 5:15 in the morning. For his final meal, he had fried pork chops, bacon, and pie. He had one visitor that morning. The identity was kept private. No clergy was summoned. Family, from either side, was not in attendance. Detective Joe Nelson drove 4 hours to the state prison. As the lead investigator since 1994, this was his first execution. This one he attended. Before the end, Zakrzewski quoted from a Robert Frost poem. He paused, incomplete, then spoke his final statement. He wished to thank the citizens of the Sunshine State for what he termed a cold, calculated, and humane death. He voiced no objections, only calculated. The same term Judge Barron used in 1996 to characterize the crime. Zakrzewski's death was recorded at 6:12 p.m. It was the 9th execution in Florida for 2025, a modern state record, matched only by Texas and South Carolina that year. Not since 1976 had Florida reached that total. Outside, Detective Nelson faced the press. His statement was brief. It is done. But the case file contained facts that were impossible to reconcile. One neighbor overheard Edward Zakrzewski's threats against his family and chose silence. Not a word to Sylvia, or to anyone. A 7-year-old boy made a call to his father, unaware of the consequences. Sylvia had yearned to go home. Her dream for years had been to return to South Korea. She never did. Anna was only 5. She would never get to have a life, and the story was nearly lost, overshadowed by events on a California freeway. 3 victims denied the national spotlight. The jury could not agree on Anna's murder. By today's Florida law, that would have been a life sentence. A judge overruled them. Under current Florida statutes, such an override is no longer legal. Was it justice? Or a system forcing an outcome it had already chosen? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Sylvia Zakrzewski, age 34. Edward Zakrzewski III, called Kim, age 7. Anna Zakrzewski, age 5. Edward James Zakrzewski II, born January 31, 1965. He died on July 31, 2025, his 60th birthday. His wife and children were denied such a life. The case began for Detective Joe Nelson at a Shrewsbury Road home in June 1994. He held on to this case for 31 years. On July 31, 2025, he traveled 4 hours to witness its final chapter. His journey reveals everything about the value of these lives to those who would not let them be erased. If this film affected you, help it find an audience. Few people recognize the names Sylvia, Edward, and Anna Zakrzewski. That reality needs to change. Subscribe for more cases like this one. In the shadows of our bustling lives, true tragedy often whispers before it screams. The story of Sylvia, 7-year-old Edward, and 5-year-old Anna isn't just a grim true crime footnote. It is a heartbreaking mirror reflecting our collective failures. When a nation's eyes were glued to a sensational highway chase in California, a mother and her 2 small children were slaughtered, their memories instantly eclipsed by the media circus. But the most chilling lesson doesn't come from our cultural obsession with spectacle. It comes from next door. A neighbor heard a man threaten to murder his entire family and chose to say nothing. That silence was the very soil in which this horrific tragedy took root. We are all the guardians of our communities. The greatest takeaway from this darkness is a call to courageous action. If you hear something, say something. Do not let the fleeting comfort of minding your own business outweigh the sacred duty to protect the vulnerable. Sylvia, little Edward, and Anna desperately deserved a world that was paying attention. Let their stolen futures be the catalyst that makes us more vigilant, more compassionate, and brave enough to speak up when it matters most.